At 5:04 p.m. on November 8, 1957, Captain Gordon Brown contacted air traffic control in Honolulu from PanAm Flight 7, heading from San Francisco. Brown was flying the Boeing Shadow Cruiser 377, named Romance of the Skies, with 38 passengers and 8 crew members on board, cruising at 10,000 feet with a 14 miles per hour headwind. He promised to check in again at 6 p.m., marking his final words before the plane disappeared into the vast southern Pacific. As 6 p.m. passed without a word, worry started to bubble up. It wasn't unusual for pilots to miss check-ins, but by 6:30 p.m. the silence was concerning. A 90-minute silence was odd, making PanAm controllers take notice. By 8 p.m., emergency plans were put into action, and the U.S. Coast Guard was alerted about the missing Flight 7. The search began with ships, submarines, and planes dispatched from Honolulu. Days passed without any sign of the missing plane, so the search team expanded. Over 30 airplanes and 14 ships joined the search, with their crews eager to find answers. Finally, on November 14th, a Navy search plane made a tragic discovery: bodies and wreckage belonging to Flight 7. Some wore life jackets, one remained strapped into a seat, but none had shoes. The wreckage, found 90 miles off course, hinted at possible trouble before the crash. Wristwatches stopped at 5:27 p.m., just 23 minutes after Captain Brown's last message. Some pieces of the wreckage showed signs of fire, while some victims showed traces of carbon monoxide poisoning. Despite extensive search efforts, no clear reason for the crash emerged. One theory involves foul play, with Ken Fortenberry accusing 2 suspects, Eugene Cross, the flight's head steward, and William Payne, a former Navy expert in explosives. Payne's suspicious actions before the flight, such as securing a large insurance policy and showing black powder to someone, raised eyebrows. Likewise, Cross, who was upset with PanAm, did odd things, like changing his will. His stepdaughter later mentioned his worsening mental health, making things even more concerning. Alternatively, some experts, like Greg Herrin, lean towards a mechanical issue. The Boeing 377 Shadow Cruiser had previous incidents, including a crash in the Amazon in 1952 and an engine failure in 1956. Yet, without concrete evidence, the true cause of the crash that claimed 46 lives in 1957 remains a mystery, leaving experts and aviation enthusiasts guessing and debating endlessly. On August 2, 1947, El Cerro Airport in Santiago, Chile received a Morse code message from BSAA Flight CS-59, a British South American Airways flight from Buenos Aires with 11 people aboard. The plane, named the Stardust, was flown by Captain Reginald Cook, an experienced Royal Air Force pilot. The message to the airport tower reported the plane would land in 4 minutes, and curiously included the strange word "Stendek." After that, the plane went silent, never arriving at its destination. For 50 years, no one knew what happened to the plane or its passengers, or what Stendek meant. Some thought a UFO had taken or destroyed the plane, and Stendek even inspired a Spanish UFO magazine. Others guessed the plane was carrying secret British documents and was destroyed on purpose. In 1998, the mystery was solved when 2 Argentinian hikers found plane wreckage and bits of clothes on the Tupungato Glacier near Santiago. A follow-up army mission in 2000 found more wreckage and several bodies, confirming the glacier as Stardust's final resting place. The cold preserved the bodies well, letting scientists take genetic samples. By 2002, a number of victims had been identified through genetic tests, giving families answers they'd long waited for. Studying the propellers and wreckage showed the plane was flying fast without its wheels down when it crashed. This suggests it wasn't trying an emergency landing. Instead, it is likely that due to poor weather and strong winds, Stardust became disoriented and descended too early, hitting the mountain. While many questions about Stardust's crash have been answered, one big one remains. What does Stendek mean? Even after almost 80 years, nobody knows. People have ideas, like perhaps it was simply a mistake in the Morse code, or perhaps the plane was trying to report descent but misspelled it due to hypoxia. None of these theories seem more likely than others. Another theory suggests the radio operator was using a wartime code for severe turbulence, descending, emergency crash landing. Perhaps the crew knew there was trouble and used an old code instead of SOS while flying in bad weather, but this doesn't match the lack of evidence for an emergency landing. Until new proof comes up, Stendeck will be the last mystery of the sad Stardust story. On December 29, 1972, tragedy struck when Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades. The crew, busy with a broken indicator light, accidentally turned off the autopilot without realizing it. Even though the pilots noticed the plane's altitude change later on, it was too late to avoid disaster. Sadly, 101 out of 176 people on board lost their lives. The crash site and cause of the accidents aren't secrets, but stories from other Eastern Airlines crews hint that the spirits of those lost that night might still be around. When workers cleaned up the wreckage, they found that the swamp's mud and water softened the plane's impact, leaving many parts undamaged. Reportedly, Eastern Airlines decided to salvage and reuse whatever they could take from the crash site, putting these pieces back into their other planes. Soon after, rumors spread among Eastern Airlines staff about seeing two ghosts from Flight 401 on different planes. Captain Robert Loft and flight engineer Don Repo were reportedly seen separately on several different occasions. In one story, Loft's ghost was spotted sitting in first class, wearing his pilot uniform. The plane's captain recognized Loft right away, but the ghost disappeared quickly. On another Eastern Airlines flight, a flight attendant opened an overhead bin and saw Loft's face staring back at her. While Loft's sightings seemed random, Repo's spirit allegedly gave warnings to flights in danger. 3 flight attendants said they saw Repo's face in the oven door of a plane, warning them of a possible fire on board. During the plane's trip to New York, it did have an engine problem that almost caused a fire. Luckily, the crew acted fast and prevented a disaster. The stories of these ghosts spread so much among workers that Eastern Airlines eventually said anyone who told ghost stories would lose their job. Furthermore, there were discussions amongst the employees about claims that the ghosts only appeared on flights with parts from Flight 401. Allegedly, the company took out these parts from its planes, and after that, the ghost sightings stopped. This made people wonder if Loft and Repo were real or just stories made up because of fear. But a company historian later said the ghost stories and reused parts were just made-up stories. On May 25, 2003, Ben Padilla and John Mutu boarded Boeing 727-N844AA at 4 de Fevereiro Airport in Angola. Despite its prior use transporting fuel to mines, this flight seemed routine. However, Padilla and Mutu weren't qualified to fly it, and no flight had been scheduled for that day. Shortly after takeoff, the 727 vanished, along with Padilla and Mutu. They were never found. So, what happened to N844AA? Originally built in 1975, the plane had served in the American Airlines fleet for 25 years before being leased to a South African company. After a failed project, it was abandoned in Angola, where its exterior sustained damage. Despite its condition, the plane's engines remained functional. Mitty Joseph, the president of Aerospace Sales and Leasing Incorporated, used Padilla's help to make it airworthy again. Despite his aviation knowledge, Padilla's unpredictable behavior raised concerns. Upon arriving in Angola in November 2002, he hired John Mutu as a mechanic. Things were going well until the critical day in May of the following year when the two men and the aircraft vanished. Initially, American intelligence agencies suspected terrorism due to the jet's capacity to hold large fuel barrels, raising fears of a possible bombing. However, as time passed without any signs of foul play, suspicions turned towards the possibility of insurance fraud. Joseph's questionable business practices and the poor condition of the plane led some investigators to suspect he might have organized its theft. But Padilla's family had a different theory, suggesting the two men might have been abducted or harmed by individuals hiding inside the 727. Padilha's siblings acknowledged his flaws, but insisted that he couldn't commit such fraud. They pointed to the lack of communication with air control and the absence of plane sightings on local runways as evidence that Padilha and Mutu might have been forced or harmed upon entering the aircraft. Even now, the fate of N844AA remains a mystery, though experts note that its size would have allowed it to land on many unmarked dirt runways in the area. On August 16, 1942, the military blimp L-8 showed up above Ocean Beach, California. It had left San Francisco earlier that day for a military patrol, but as it got close to the shore, things seemed off. The blimp touched the ground at Ocean Beach, was damaged, and then drifted back over San Francisco. Finally, it crashed on Bell Avenue in Daly City. Rescue teams rushed to the scene, but when they arrived, they found something strange. The blimp was empty. Lieutenant Ernest Cody and Ensign Charles Adams, the crew, were nowhere to be seen. At first, people weren't too worried. The crash didn't seem severe, so maybe Cody and Adams had walked away. But after searching the area, they couldn't find any trace of them. Despite searching extensively, there were no clues to be found of them. By August 18th, they were officially declared missing. No distress calls were made, the engines worked fine, and emergency gear like rafts and parachutes was still there. The investigation ruled out enemy attacks, mechanical problems, or standard evacuation procedures. The disappearance of Cody and Adams remained a puzzling mystery. The official story says the men died while doing a routine task with a smoke marker. They think one man slipped and accidentally pulled the other out while trying to help. Some say maybe Japanese soldiers took them, but it's unclear why or how they'd sent the balloon back. Others think the men might have tried to run away, but it didn't work out. There's even a strange idea that they got affected by radiation from an experimental radar in the balloon and fell out. But there's no proof of such gear in any L-class blimp. If you could solve just one of these airplane mysteries, which would you choose?